Is there a truly reality out there that humans could really know? It's an age-old battle between realists and absolutists. God is not great, how religion ruins everything. And yet it's utterly and totally ridiculous. We need to live for something beyond ourselves. You know, in the 20th century, we all stand amazed at the achievements of science. It's one thing after another, one technological marvel after another. Computers, communication, the iPhone. It's unbelievable, all the stuff that science is doing. We've got the internet. It's like a revolution that's happening right before our eyes with the internet. No question, we can only marvel at what science is achieving. Of course, as much as we're marveling now, we're not marveling about how they marveled about science at the beginning of the 20th century. They were rapturous about what science was going to do. And yet I want to challenge that a little. I think there's some problems with science that I think it might be worth taking a few minutes to look at today as we proceed with this. As I said, however much we marvel at science, we don't marvel with it anywhere near the way they did at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Back then, folks were just utterly rapturous about what they thought science was going to do for them. And that their kind of love affair or whatever kind of ended with a small event. It was called World War I. They saw what science was able to do. And as bad as that was, there was World War II, there was Hiroshima, Auschwitz, and so on. And suddenly people started to see the flip side of science as well. And I think though we today in the 21st century, we still marvel at what science has done for us. We hardly, I believe, think it's going to solve all our problems the way folks thought that science was going to do 100 years ago. Instead, in the 20th century, we're worrying about, science kind of scares us. Dirty bombs, global warmings, weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, there is definitely a scary side to science. Yet even with that, many people still view science as the final arbiter of truth. Science says it, science proves it, that's it, no questions asked. Because again, after all, look at how well the science works. And yet there's a fallacy with that. You see, there's some very basic challenges to the whole scientific endeavor. For starters, science is, after all, it's empirical. It's what we see with our senses. We look around at the world, and not at the whole world, but specific parts of it, and from looking at it, from using data, from looking, from seeing, from smelling, from feeling, whatever, we attempt to draw conclusions about the world that is necessary, universal, and certain. And that's not easy. What makes you think that's just because X does or Y does this in one part of the universe, that it's going to automatically do it in another part of the universe? Just because it does it now, will it do it 1,000 years from now? And there's another problem with science too. It's called affirming the consequence. And it goes something like this. I have a theory, a scientific theory, and if my theory is true, then X over here is going to turn green. Voila, X turned green. Therefore, my theory is true. Of course, that doesn't necessarily follow, does it? X could have turned green from any one of another reasons, none of them which had anything to do with your theory. But it's not always easy to know why it did or to disprove it. I say there's gravity. Gravity's going to cause my hands to fall. If I let go of my hand and it falls, it's gravity. Well, I have a different theory. I believe they're invisible spiders from Mars, and they're here on the Earth. And if I let go of my hand, it's going to fall because the invisible spiders from Mars are pulling it down. Well, look. Truth. Invisible spiders from Mars has caused my hand to fall down. Therefore, my theory is true. Now, that might seem like a little silly, but this basic problem remains today in science. We can never be sure, we can never be certain that just because a theory works, it's true. It might seem true, all the data might seem to fall into place, all according to the theory, but in the end, the theory could turn out to be false. Let me give you an example for 13 centuries of a theory that worked. It was Claudius Ptolemy and his geocentric universe. In his work, he believed that everything in the universe, everything circled around the earth. Okay, all of it circled. You know, the earth was the center of the universe and everything circled around it. It was the first systematic mathematical treatise on celestial motion. And the thing was, it worked. You can judge, you could tell where you were, you could say what the stars were going to do, on and on and on. And yet the funny thing about it was, folks, it was all wrong. It was the fundamental flaw was about as accurate as flat earth geography. But it didn't stop people from using it. I mean, come on, the earth, the center of the universe, it's crazy, and yet it worked. Next comes Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton and his famous theory of gravity and so on. Okay, Newton did his theory, you know, he could detect everything. They could tell exactly what was going to do what using Einstein's theory of gravity. Remember the movie Apollo 13? When the space capsule blew and they said they were going to use the law of gravity, the capsule was going to go around the moon, and the gravity of the moon would have hurled the capsule back towards Earth. And that's what they did. It worked. You know, the only problem? It was based on totally false assumptions. Albert Einstein came by 3 centuries later and kicked out the whole foundation of Newtonian physics. But the point is, folks, it worked. It worked for centuries, and it still works today, even though it was wrong. Now, it's funny, in the 20th century today, you've got 2 foundational teachings of science. There's general relativity and quantum mechanics. They're 2 of the most successful scientific theories ever devised. They work. They've been measured to degrees that are fantastically precise. And you know the funny thing about it is, though? The funny thing about it is they're mutually exclusive. If quantum mechanics is correct, then general relativity has to be wrong. If general relativity is correct, then quantum mechanics has to be wrong. In other words, they both work in fabulous ways, particularly quantum theory. I mean, our cell phones and computers and so many of the things that we take for granted all work. They work because they work from it. And yet there's something fundamentally wrong with the theory, because the most basic theory, quantum physics and general relativity, clash with each other. They both can't be right. And yet, according to the math, according to the theories and everything, they work perfectly. Now, what does this say? This says to me that we could understand something well enough to get it to work, but it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's true. Yes, science works, you know, but the practical gains from science prove only that we understand the science well enough to get practical gains from it. These gains prove nothing about the absolute correctness of the science itself. You know, there's no question science works, and it works very well. But like all human knowledge, it's still contingent. It's still open to revision or even to being scrapped completely. So, but sadly for many people today, in their mind, science has become the final arbiter of truth. I mean, if science says something, then well, that's it, and who are we to challenge it? Well, there's no question science is good and has done a lot of good. But what a tragedy. What a tragedy to sell your soul for something for a theory that in one generation is laughed at as a myth, as a joke in another. Unfortunately, too many folks have tended to do just that. And see, that's the problem. We say something, it's science, this is it, this is the way it is, and how dare anybody challenge it when in another generation will come by and laugh at it. And this has happened through history. So again, I think it's important that we be very careful. We be very careful at how much faith we put in science. And we have to be very careful when someone says, well, it works, it works. Okay, it could work. The whole idea of the earth being a whole cosmology, a whole astronomy, based on the Earth being the center of the universe, worked. It worked for 1,300 years. And in the end, it turned out to be flat out wrong. So maybe some of the theories today, evolution is one example. Some people, that's it, scientists say it, but who knows if time should last, if we don't blow ourselves up using the science. Maybe 100 years from now, people will look at the theory of evolution and laugh at it the way we laugh at some of the theories we've seen in the past. Something to think about.